Rejoice, ye penny-pinching nerds, rejoice! For this is a season unbound by our bank accounts, unfettered by fees. A legendary age of liberty. This is the summer of free! Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to the final installment of the Summer of Free 2019. This year, with each installment, I've been recommending one movie with geek appeal, and then in lieu of recommending a video game, which I didn't see a ton of options, to really make that a recurring thing this year. Probably more of that next year. But as far as video games go, I decided to introduce to you video game documentaries that I thought were really interesting or compelling, or definitely not the snooze fest that you might expect documentaries to be. So the final two recommendations I have: first, the movie, and that's District 9, which you can watch over at vudu.com, VUDU.com. Once again, I'm going to let time-traveling Peter visit us and share his thoughts from all the way back in episode 103 of what is now the Christian Geek Central podcast. Here are his thoughts right now. District 9. This Peter Jackson-produced sci-fi flick has been simmering in the kettle for a while now, but does it live up to the mystique? Well, that's hard to say. My viewing of the film was tainted by a bit of rumors I heard that the flick had a heavy political agenda. I carried that baggage with me until almost the last 20 minutes of the movie, so my mind was a bit distracted and I may have been thinking too hard. So bear with me as I try to compensate for the baggage I brought to the movie and try to fairly review this thing. The basic premise is that aliens came to Earth 20 years ago in a horrible physical condition. It's suggested that they were part of some sort of intergalactic forced labor and escaped to Earth seeking refuge, although the fact that they were part of intergalactic forced labor, if it was mentioned near the beginning of the movie, I missed it. I saw a hint of it later on, but I guess it wasn't made strong enough for my thick head to catch on to it. So it wasn't really clear that they were forced labor at one time. Humanity welcomes them in any case and gives them some territory to live in, but then takes advantage of them economically, obsessed with gaining the aliens' weapons technology. There is also a clear lack of respect, even racism, toward the aliens. The lead character is a man who works for the oppressive human government who is infected by alien technology that allows him to make use of the aliens' weapons, which humans are normally unable to do. From that point of the movie until the end, various groups of people want to either capture, kill, or in some way use this guy for their own gain. Now, the story is interesting enough. I was certainly never bored and was actually very invested in the direction of the plot, but I was involved more intellectually than emotionally for most of the film. And again, that could have been because I was distracted, trying to read between the lines and figure out what kind of political agenda somebody might be trying to throw at me. So bear that in mind. The script and documentary style, though, I didn't think they don't lend themselves to helping us get to know the characters in this movie. District 9 looks great from beginning to end. Its use of the documentary film style is striking, and it helps cover flaws in special effects, much as the camera work did the same for Battlestar Galactica if you were watching the new series. Now, the visuals were not cheap by any standards, don't get me wrong, but like most CGI effects, they look like CGI effects. The details are great, but the motion looks kind of computer-generated and artificial. Still, the various weapons, robotics, and explosions are fun to watch, and most movie fans, I think, will likely be impressed or at least pleased with what they see. Adding to the gritty realism this film shoots for is the fact that it is cast with unknowns from top to bottom, a very nice change of pace, especially since the acting was wonderful across the board, though a couple of the quote bad guys were a little bit cookie cutter, and during the first 15 minutes of interviews I kept wondering how they cast so many small roles with so many believable actors. The lack of a single American accent anywhere to be found made me feel just a little like a cultural outsider, not a big complaint at all, and at the same time it brought a wonderful sense of realism to the movie, which was really nice. Now, as for the relevance of this film to real-world issues, it certainly scores well in this category. I can easily see people having worthwhile conversations after watching District 9. But if I were to start a conversation after this film, it wouldn't be
It would not be about apartheid or racism, issues the script was definitely inspired by. Why? Well, because aliens are aliens and people are people. The film clearly paints the aliens as victims and the human segregationists as, and I put that in quotes, as bad guys. But I can't firmly put a black hat on the humans for wanting to be separated from the aliens. I think it's certainly wrong to take advantage of and manipulate the aliens in this movie. But separation to me just makes sense. And I'll tell you why. Nowhere in the film was there any discussion of comparative biology between the aliens and humans. It appears that humans just brought them to Earth without making any effort to screen them for possible viruses or diseases that would be potentially harmful to humans. These are alien life forms, for Pete's sake. Just opening up their ship on Earth may have exposed the world to a deadly airborne virus. Now, one could look at my argument here and say that I'm being a little too serious and, nitpicky about this plot issue and that the movie is not meant to be realistic. However, the movie, through its gritty content, its very realistic social themes, and the documentary style, everything about this movie asks to be considered realistic. If the script included mention of the aliens' complete biological safety to humans, which I think they could have done that with a just little quick reference, then I could go along and condemn their segregation, as I believe the filmmakers want me to do. Otherwise, I have to side with those who wish the aliens to remain as physically distant from them as possible. Now, I didn't get the sense in the movie that people wanted to be distant from the aliens because they feared the biological thing. I think we were supposed to think that they just hated them just because they were different. The usual, how we think of racism, right? But if I were living in that world, I wouldn't be hating them because they're different. I'd be hating them because I'm afraid of them. And, who knows what kind of freaky things they, I'd be pretty ticked off at the government, too. I'd just be living in a hole somewhere, I think. I think I would hate everybody if somebody in the world decided to let aliens just kind of hang out and spread who knows what kind of diseases all over the world. But anyway. So if the apartheid comparison doesn't really work, what is there to talk about in this movie? Well, there's a very common catchphrase floating around today that goes something like, people are basically good. I think we say this of ourselves because the thought of being judged and coming up short by God or anyone is more terrible than we really want to deal with. So we just kind of have these feel-good statements like people are basically good. Since the definition of good might be debated endlessly, let's just assume for the moment that at the very least, a good person will think about and care for others more than themselves. They will be selfless instead of selfish. If this is the starting point for a universal definition of good, then District 9 makes a strong statement against the idea that we are all, quote, basically good. This movie has almost no redeeming human characters. Even the hero spends most of the film serving himself. At one time I thought, oh, maybe he's changing, but then nope, guess not, Every human is after prestige, power, or some form of self-preservation. They're thinking about themselves first. And although this film is a work of fiction, it reminds us that historically, we have shown these traits to be a defining part of our nature. We can strive for goodness, we should strive for goodness, but in that process, if we want to move forward, we've got to deal with and acknowledge and work through our junk along the way. All right, so overall, quality on this movie, I thought it was really good. 8.5 out of 10, and relevance. I think you'll get some good conversation out of this if you're in that mode. 8.5 out of 10.
Then some quick rapid-fire recommendations just to give you a few more options if District 9 doesn't interest you. The Mythica movie series I've talked about on the Summer of Free before, but that was before I had finished watching the entire series. I have finished watching the entire series since then, and I can definitely recommend it as it's definitely, you can see the budget in it, but it looks kind of like maybe 90s or early 2000s TV quality, like solid TV quality budget, I would say, as far as monsters and effects and stuff. So the blue screens are apparent, but it has what a lot of big budget fantasy movies don't have, and that is like a real true blue D&D tabletop game kind of vibe to it. Characters are finding rooms full of treasure and upgrading their equipment with what they find and stuff. You get these little tropes and moments that are very much associated with tabletop role-playing games that are brought into this movie. So if you really want to scratch that D&D vibe in a movie experience, and you're willing to put up with some of the other shortcomings that come with a lower budget, kind of kind of thing, then I highly recommend the Mythica movies. There are 5 of them, and you can watch them all for free right now at tubitv.com, tubitv.com. Also, at tubitv.com is Monsters. If you liked the recent Godzilla movie, which I can't remember what the subtitle was, Godzilla something King of Monsters, I think it was called. This movie, Monsters, is made by the same director that directed that recent Godzilla movie. And so if you like the way monsters were depicted and treated and just, anything going on in that movie, the movie Monsters is really how that director got that gig. And I really enjoyed that one as well. You can get my thoughts from episode 175 of The Spirit... Oh, dang it, why is my phone going off now? Isn't that always the case? Episode 175 of the Spirit Blade Underground podcast, which has since been rebranded as the Christian Geek Central podcast. All of those episodes are archived over at spiritblade.com. So again, that's episode 175 if you want to get my expanded thoughts on that. And now, the final documentary I'm going to be recommending this year is Raising Kratos. Sony Santa Monica is just kind of riding high right now after the success of God of War for the PlayStation 4, which rebooted the long-running series with some major changes in both gameplay and tone. When PlayStation released a 2-hour documentary about the making of the recent reboot, I never expected how dramatic and seemingly unfiltered it would be in depicting AAA game development. With multiple cameras recording every stage of development behind the scenes, this is likely the most exposed AAA game development has ever been in a documentary. Although I like several of the classic games, the most recent God of War was not my preferred style of gameplay. Despite that, and also knowing in advance that the game ended up being a massive success, I was still very invested in the tension and stakes of this documentary. This is not near the underdog do-or-die story that some of the other documentaries I've mentioned have been, but interpersonal tensions were represented in a way that I could feel, and the personal cost and brokenness of those involved creating the game was surprisingly put on display. It's another example of how massive success in almost any sector of entertainment often comes with severe cost to the most important relationships in life. This documentary is bold enough to ask, is it worth it? And let that question hang in the air without necessarily answering yes. And for that, I appreciate it all the more. The documentary also points out the ethical maturing of the series, dialing back some of the violence, and especially dialing back female objectification that past games were known for. It gave me at least a small reason to hope that as game developers get older, maybe they'll be a little more thoughtful about the content they create for so many people to mindlessly absorb. Not only did I find Raising Kratos engaging, I think God used it to bring some things to mind worth considering. So whether you're a God of War fan or not, if video games are a significant part of your hobby routines, I'd recommend saving that theater money or rental cash one weekend and spending a night with Raising Kratos, which you can watch on the PlayStation YouTube channel. All right, that's it for the Summer of Free this year, but you can actually enjoy the Summer of Free all year long. Just do a search for Summer of Free on the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel or visit summeroffree.com. Cheaters never prosper unless they have the right codes, and then they prosper a lot. You can prosper too by marking your calendar for Friday, August 2nd from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific. I will be streaming a very particular set of video games in my library, the retro games I love to cheat on. Those special games from my past that I really enjoyed but would never have played without invincibility, infinite time, infinite health, or infinite lives. Sure, you can get good, but I'd rather, have fun. I mean, these are video games we're talking about, right? You can come and watch me stay bad on Friday, August 2nd from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific at youtube.com/ChristianGeekCentral.